I cooked. I cleaned. I begged. Every morning I rose before the sun, my hands raw from scrubbing floors that were never dirty enough for her. My eyes stinging from chopping vegetables for meals she always found fault in. My body ached, but I told myself if I just tried harder, if I just gave more, maybe she would finally look at me and see more than a servant. But she never did. That night, after I had cleared the table and washed every plate until my reflection blurred in the water, I stood quietly in the corner, waiting for her approval. She looked at me with eyes as sharp as glass, lips curling in disdain. "You are useless," she said. The words landed like a slap, burning across my chest. My knees felt weak, my throat heavy, but what hurt most wasn't her cruelty. It was the silence that followed. I turned to him, my husband, the man who had sworn to stand by me, who had promised to defend me, to love me. He sat beside her, his eyes fixed on the table. Not a word. Not a glance. Just silence, thick and suffocating. I wanted him to say something, anything. To tell her she was wrong. To tell me I mattered. But his lips stayed sealed, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, as if he had decided long ago that her voice was louder than mine. I stood there, my chest tight, forcing myself not to cry. And in that moment, I realized something bitter and cruel. I hadn't just married him. I had married her. And in this house, her voice would always be the law. After that night, her words, "You are useless," echoed in every corner of the house. They clung to me like smoke, creeping into my chest until I began to believe them. Every chore I did felt like a test I was destined to fail. Every step I took felt watched, measured, judged. The mornings grew heavier. I would wake early, drag myself into the kitchen, and prepare meals carefully, measuring salt twice, tasting soup 3 times, making sure the bread was warm but not burnt. And yet, no matter how careful I was, her lips always twisted into that same sneer. Too bland. Too oily. Too late. One morning she pushed the plate back across the table without touching it. Even a child could do better. I looked at my husband, desperate for him to speak. He lowered his gaze, chewing his food silently, pretending he hadn't heard. The cleaning was no different. If I polished the floors, she dragged her slippers across them and complained about streaks. If I washed the curtains, she ran her fingers along the fabric, sighing about how dull they looked. If I swept the porch, she waited until I finished, then shook the doormat out again, scattering dust over the steps. Each time I turned to him, hoping for a word, a defense, some reminder that I wasn't alone. But he stayed still, his silence a wall I could never climb. At night, I cried quietly into my pillow, careful not to wake him. My tears soaked the fabric until I felt like I was drowning. I asked myself the same questions over and over. Was I really useless? Was I really the failure she said I was? Or was I just invisible in this house where her shadow swallowed everything? The humiliation grew sharper whenever guests visited. She played the role of a generous matriarch, greeting neighbors with a warm smile, offering them sweets and tea. But the moment they complimented the home, she laughed and said, "Don't thank me, she should be doing more. She just tries, but..." Her voice would trail off, her eyes cutting toward me like a knife. Laughter followed. Mine never joined. I tried to fight back once. After another long day of scrubbing, I placed the meal carefully on the table, every detail perfect. She frowned before even tasting it, muttering, "Still useless." Something broke inside me. My voice rose before I could stop it. "Why? Why do you hate me so much? What have I done to deserve this?" The table fell silent. My husband froze, his fork midair. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing, lips curling into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "You exist," she said simply. Her words carved through me. I looked at him again, praying he would finally speak, finally push back. But he set his fork down, rubbed his forehead and whispered, "Don't start. Don't start." That was all he had for me. The days that followed were worse. She didn't just call me useless. She began to make sure everyone else believed it too. She told the neighbors I couldn't cook. She told her relatives I was lazy. She even laughed once and said, "I don't know why my son married her. He deserved someone better." And through it all, he stayed silent. The silence was louder than her cruelty. It told me where his loyalty lay. told me who he feared more. It told me that in this house I was not a wife. I was not a daughter-in-law. I was not even human. I was a burden they both tolerated. But as I lay awake night after night, staring into the darkness, one thought began to flicker inside me. If my husband's silence was my cage, then her cruelty was the key. And one day I would use it to walk out of this house, not as the useless girl she wanted me to be, but as someone she could never erase. The cruelty didn't ease. It grew sharper with each passing day, as if she had realized that silence was my only shield and made it her mission to strip that away too. One morning I spent hours preparing breakfast. Eggs cooked perfectly, bread toasted golden, tea brewed just right. I placed the plates carefully on the table, trying to steady my breathing. She sat down, sniffed once, and pushed the food away without tasting it. Even dogs wouldn't eat this. My hands clenched at my sides. I looked at my husband, desperate for him to speak. He didn't. He never did. He just reached for the plate, quietly took a bite and chewed in silence. Her eyes narrowed, watching me. See? He won't even defend you. Because he knows I'm right. Her words struck harder than the insult itself. I turned to him again, my chest burning. Do you? I whispered. His fork paused for only a second before he continued eating. No words. No glance. Just silence. That silence hollowed me. Her tactics became crueler in front of others. She criticized the way I dressed, the way I walked, the way I breathed. When relatives visited, she laughed loudly and said, "We try not to expect much from her. She doesn't know how to keep a proper home." The guests chuckled awkwardly, their eyes flicking toward me with pity I didn't ask for. Each time my husband sat still, smiling faintly, as though his mother's cruelty was harmless entertainment. One evening she went further. I had spent the entire day cleaning for a family gathering. By the time everyone arrived, my arms ached, my back screamed, but the house sparkled. As I served the food, she clapped her hands and said, "Well, at least she's useful for one thing, waiting on us." The room laughed. I felt the heat rise in my face, tears burning my eyes. I turned to my husband, begging silently for rescue. But he raised his glass and toasted along with them, his lips curving into a smile. That was the moment something inside me cracked. I stopped hearing their laughter. I stopped tasting the salt in my tears. All I felt was a strange, quiet emptiness, the kind that doesn't break, it hardens. From then on, I noticed every detail more sharply. How she deliberately left chores half done so I'd be blamed. How she whispered about me to neighbors, her words dripping with venom disguised as concern. How she smiled at my husband while tearing me apart in the same breath. But most of all, I noticed him. His silence wasn't neutral, it was a choice. He chose her over me every single day. He chose his comfort over my dignity. He chose to sit in quiet obedience while I drowned. The realization was bitter, but it gave me something unexpected. Clarity. One night, after another cruel remark, her voice sharp as she sneered, "You'll never be enough for this family." I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I looked her in the eyes and for the first time said nothing back. She smirked, mistaking my silence for defeat. But inside me it was different this time. It wasn't silence born from weakness. It was silence born from decision. Because I knew then that the breaking point had come. And when I broke, I wouldn't shatter. I would rebuild. Without her. Without his silence. Without any of them. The night it all came to a head, the house was full of tension so thick it could be sliced with a knife. Dinner had been another performance, me cooking, her criticizing, him sitting silent as always. But something was different in me. I no longer flinched when her words hit. I no longer searched his face for rescue. I ate my meal quietly, letting the storm rage around me while inside. Something steady began to rise. After dinner, she sat in the living room with her tea, her voice sharp as she spoke to him in front of me. "You married down," she said. "I told you she would never be enough. A real wife would have given us pride, respect, grandchildren by now. All you have is this useless girl who clings to you." My hands froze over the dishes. I turned slowly, the soap dripping from my fingers. For years those words would have gutted me. But tonight they ignited something else, courage. I dried my hands, walked into the living room, and stood in front of them. My voice shook at first, but I forced it steady. Enough. Her eyebrows shot up. My husband looked startled, but neither spoke. The silence pressed against me, but this time it didn't crush me. I took a breath. I have scrubbed floors until my knees bled. I have cooked meals until my hands blistered. I have begged for crumbs of kindness that never came. And through it all I believed maybe one day you would see me. Respect me. Accept me. But you never wanted a daughter-in-law. You wanted a servant. And he? I turned to my husband, my chest heavy. He let you. His mouth opened, but no words came. I stepped closer, my voice sharper now. Do you know what silence does? Kills. Every day you stayed quiet, you chose her cruelty over my dignity. You let her erase me piece by piece until I believed I was nothing. But I am done being erased. Her lips curled into a sneer. And what will you do? Walk out. You'd be nothing without us. I smiled bitterly. No. I'll be nothing because of you if I stay. The words hung in the air, heavier than the walls themselves. I walked past them into the bedroom and pulled out the small bag I had packed weeks ago in secret. My hands no longer shook. I was calm, certain. When I returned to the living room with the bag slung over my shoulder, her face twisted in triumph, thinking she had driven me out. But I met her gaze and said quietly, "You didn't win. You only lost the chance to know me." Then I turned to him, the man who once swore to protect me. My eyes burned, but my voice was steady. You chose silence. You chose her. And tonight I choose me. He stood, panic flickering in his eyes for the first time. Wait. You can't just leave. I shook my head. I already stayed too long. I walked to the door, my heart pounding, and for a moment I thought my knees might buckle. But the moment the cold air hit my face, I knew I had made the only choice that mattered. Behind me, her voice rang out, sharp and cruel. You'll regret this. I turned just once, my hand on the frame. No. One day, when you realize you have no one left to blame, you will. The door closed with a finality that echoed in my chest. The night air was heavy, but it felt like freedom. Each step I took away from that house was a step out of chains I had worn too long. Tears blurred my eyes, but they weren't tears of weakness anymore. They were release. I walked down the street, my bag heavy on my shoulder, my heart lighter than it had ever been. For the first time in years I could breathe. The cruel mother-in-law had tried to break me. My husband's silence had tried to erase me. But in the end I had chosen my own voice. And that choice was stronger than all of their cruelty combined.